My name is Isabella. I'm 24 years old. And last night my phone lit up at 10:12 p.m. with a text from my mother-in-law that read, "Start cooking at 4 a.m." She added a PDF guest list like I was the event planner she refused to pay and the daughter-in-law she never quite got around to respecting. My husband, soon to be a very complicated word, leaned in the bedroom doorway, arms folded over the t-shirt he wore to bed like a uniform for indifference, and said with that calm that always felt like a paper cut, "And make sure everything is perfect this time, of course," I said. And my voice did what it had been trained to do in this family. It put on a smile. Even when my face didn't, I put down the phone, folded my apron on the dresser as if preparing for battle, and set my alarm. Not for 4. For 3. By 3 a.m. I was under the hard airport lights that make everyone look like a suspect, the handle of my small rolling suitcase humming over cement. I bought a black coffee and stood by a window that faced the runway, the darkness outside, a mirror I could use to study the person I had become in just 2 years of marriage: tidy, agreeable, overqualified for tasks no one saw. A polite ghost who cooked for 30 and ate in the laundry room, so the seating chart could stay perfect. At 3:07 a.m., I texted my mother, leaving. It surprised me when her reply came fast, as if she'd been sleeping with the phone in her palm. "Proud of you. Call when you land." This wasn't a flight to a glamorous somewhere. It was a departure to the version of myself I had been before Sabrina, my mother-in-law, decided that loving her son meant supervising me. And before Marcus, the son, decided the easiest way to love both of us was to love me behind closed doors and love her everywhere else. When we first moved into their world, a world of big candles and bigger opinions, Sabrina had stood in the marble kitchen and tapped the counter with manicured fingers. "Tradition lives in food," she said, as if declaring a State of the Union. "Our family isn't like others. We cook together, we feast together, we honor our name." "I'd love to help," I said, believing help meant help. Help meant I did it all, while she praised the ancestors. It started small. Bake this, pick up that, call Aunt Lucinda and apologize because your salad had too much lemon. Then it became lists taped to the fridge with military clarity: marinade, blanch, braise, repent. I was promoted from guest to staff without benefits, and Marcus called it a phase. The way people call hurricanes, a bit of weather. But yesterday morning, when Sabrina handed me the newest guest list, 30 relatives in town for an impromptu heritage brunch, and Marcus added the word perfect, something quiet and sharp moved through me like a key sliding into a lock. It wasn't rage. Rage is loud and breaks plates. This was intention. And intention packs a bag. The 5:10 a.m. flight to Portland had a cheap fare and, more important, a seat. Portland was where my best friend Ruth kept a futon, and where my old notebook waited in her bookcase, the one I'd left the summer I married Marcus, the summer I promised I would still be a person who wrote, and not just one who proofread Sabrina's texts to caterers. I had told myself I would return for it. I had told myself many things. The notebook had not believed me. I sipped the airport coffee, burnt courage, and watched a crew in reflective vests walk like astronauts around a plane, checking what keeps people in the air. That's all I wanted, really. A check of the bolts, a test of the wings, a chance to lift. At 3:30 a.m., I texted Marcus, "Coffee's on. Oven preheating. See you later." It wasn't a lie if later meant a different calendar. Then I turned off my phone. When the first boarding call floated over the speakers at 4:30, I felt a flutter of panic. What if I am dramatic? What if I am wrong? What if they actually need me? And then I pictured my own face in the bathroom mirror yesterday afternoon. A face somehow both young and tired, as if my 20s had packed up and left without me. And I let the boarding pass scan. I walked the short, bright tunnel where the smell of jet fuel lives, and I took my window seat. A baby cried, a man explained Bitcoin into a headset no one could see, and I pressed my palm to the cold oval of glass. The plane lifted through an early morning that was more bruised than sky. Street grids made quiet geometry beneath us. Kitchens and living rooms, tiny boxes where other people were waking to their lives. And far below, in a big beige house with a rosemary hedge, A woman would be opening a pantry door and finding nothing but air. Time does interesting things when you watch it from a plane. It expands. It sits beside you with its own seatbelt and asks if you want pretzels. I thought about the first family dinner I attended after our wedding. Sabrina had presented a roast the size of an apology and announced to the room that our Isabella would say grace. Because Isabella is good with words. I said a prayer that could have been mistaken for a campaign speech and everyone clapped, which is not the appropriate reaction to grace. But in this family applause was another utensil at the table. Marcus squeezed my knee under the table and said, "See? They already love you." It took me too long to realize love without respect is just theater. The second act of that theater was the brunches. The third act was the expectation. And the epilogue until last night was me standing at a sink full of champagne flutes, imagining everyone's compliments on my hosting as a kind of currency I could someday exchange for freedom. But compliments don't accrue. They evaporate. I fell asleep in the thin way people sleep on planes. Woke to a pink horizon and the rattle of wheels and wondered what was happening in the house now. I pictured the kitchen island like a stage without actors, the fruit bowl empty, the oven silent. I pictured Sabrina's lipstick hardening on a forgotten mug while she dialed Marcus, and Marcus standing in our bedroom doorway at 5:30, saying my name as if it were an item he had misplaced. I didn't smile when I imagined it, but the muscles in my face remembered how. Portland met me with a wet kiss of air that felt like permission. At baggage claim, I retrieved the small suitcase that held almost nothing, some t-shirts. The flannel I had stolen from Marcus years ago and kept as proof that I could still take things. A Polaroid of me and my mother on the day we moved into our tiny apartment after my father left. A copy of my birth certificate folded into a book like a pressed flower. I caught the Max downtown where the city looked like a lighter held under a pot of water, and texted Ruth from a borrowed number at a convenience store. Surprise visitor. Your futon still takes strays? Ruth replied with an address, a code, and a string of heart emojis that felt like a first meal. I arrived at her building at 7:11 a.m. My body confused about what meal we were meant to be between. The code worked, the elevator groaned, and when I opened the door to her apartment, a plant nearly hit me in the face. Because Ruth arranges greenery like a person trying to build the rainforest from memory. I put down my suitcase, breathed the sweet dirt smell, and found the old notebook on the second shelf where I had left it 2 summers ago, between a dog-eared Murakami and a guide to edible mushrooms. The elastic band had left a permanent dent in the cardboard cover. When I opened it, the first page was still a map of a girl who believed she would become herself and had a few ideas about how. Ruth padded out in socks and an oversized sweater, her hair a solar flare around her head. She looked at me once, not dramatically, and opened her arms. When we hugged, something heavy changed temperature inside me, like metal cooling. You're safe, she said. I left, I answered, and hearing it aloud made my body a bell ringing. We made coffee. Mine tasted like a future that could survive without whipped cream. Ruth did not ask 100 questions. She asked one. Do you want to tell me? Yes, I said, and the word broke open inside me like a seed. I told her about the lists. About the way Marcus's face changed when his mother walked into a room. Like he removed the softness I loved and stored it where no one could see. About the smallness that had crept into me. The way I had started arranging my day around the moods of a woman who believed being right was a religion. And today, Ruth said softly, they'll arrive to find an empty kitchen. I nodded. And they'll learn they can cook. Ruth smiled in a way that wasn't cruel, just precise. What will you do? I lifted the notebook like it was a passport. Write, work, find a job that doesn't pay me in gratitude. Call my mother when I stop shaking. Call a lawyer when I start. I powered on my phone. It convulsed in my hand with messages, tiny earthquakes stacking into a larger one, from Marcus. At 5:42 a.m., where are you? From Sabrina at 5:45 a.m., this is childish. From Marcus at 5:52 a.m., we have 30 people here. Please tell me this is a misunderstanding. From Aunt Lucinda, who apparently had my number. Sweetheart, are you ill? From Sabrina again at 6:02 a.m. You've embarrassed us. The family will not forget this. And then at 6:10 a.m. a photo. The kitchen island covered in grocery bags, unspooled plastic wrap. Bewildered relatives holding wooden spoons like torches. The caption, "Look what you caused." Ruth peered over my shoulder. "Look what they're finally doing." I typed a reply to Marcus, "I am fine. I've gone to stay with a friend. I need space. Please do not come after me. We will talk with a counselor or with a lawyer. Today, please eat." I did not respond to Sabrina. I did not respond to Aunt Lucinda. I placed the phone face down and listened to the sound the city makes. When it hasn't had enough sleep, we ate toast with butter that tasted like butter, not obligation. Ruth left for work around 9. After scribbling her Wi-Fi password on a post-it that also said, "Take the good blanket," I showered and put on the flannel, which still carried a ghost of Marcus's detergent cedar apology. I opened the notebook and wrote one sentence, which felt as heavy and light as a vow. Today I left the house where I served and entered the life where I am served by no one but myself. The doorbell rang at 10:03. I froze. Portland has a way of sounding like an unexpected guest. Gusts of rain can impersonate a knock. And I almost convinced myself it was weather until the bell rang again. Polite but insistent. My body remembered a habit I used to glance at the kitchen cameras before answering any door. At the big beige house. Because Sabrina liked to watch the threshold like a throne. Here, there was no camera, only a peephole. And through it I saw a man who was neither Marcus nor one of his uncles, who wore heavy watches like handcuffs. This man held a cardboard drink tray and wore an airport lanyard clipped to his pocket. I opened the door an inch. "Isabella?" he asked, careful with the syllables. "Yes." He lifted the tray to coffees. A paper bag, and his face ranged itself into a smile that made room for memory. We sat next to each other on the plane. "You lent me a pen." I said I was writing a complaint to the airline, but it was actually a resignation letter. I remembered. He had been the man with the headset. Without the headset, he looked younger, a little stunned. Like someone who had just negotiated with himself and lost in a good way. "I'm Theo," he said. "I realized after I got in the lift that I had your notebook in my tote. You dropped it when you were digging for gum during turbulence." He held up the paper bag. "And I brought muffins as a bribe for forgiveness." I blinked. I had my notebook. Hadn't I? My palm went cold. I looked to the table where the elastic-scarred cardboard sat. The notebook was there, open to my vow. I looked back. "I have my notebook." Theo's smile tilted. "Then I have someone else's life in this bag." He opened it and pulled out an identical notebook. Same brand, same elastic scar, but when he flipped it open, the handwriting was not mine. It was neat, architectural, the kind of handwriting that builds rooms. He read the first line aloud before blushing. "Sorry, habit. It says, on the day I leave, I will take nothing but my name." We stared at each other. To strangers holding to books that had chosen this morning to be mirrors. "Would you like coffee?" he asked, which is to say, would you like to stand in the doorway of a new life and not be alone for 5 minutes? I let him in. We sat at Ruth's small table with its jam scar and mismatched salt and pepper shakers, shaped like swans. Theo told me he worked nights at the airport and days in a building, shaped like a philosophy question. And that last night in the lull between flights, he had realized he'd been living on standby for 2 years. I told him I had fed a family so they wouldn't notice I was starving. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, and the question was not a demand for a performance. Just a hand extended toward a cliff. "I will be," I said, surprised by the verb tense, future perfect. The grammar of hope. My phone buzzed again. This time, a video call from Marcus. I let it ring out. It buzzed once more, then switched to a stream of text apologies, logistics, bargaining chips disguised as questions. I read none of them. I opened the group thread titled Family Events, which Sabrina had created and locked like a vault. And I typed, "I won't be cooking for the heritage brunch today or any other day. Tradition that requires a servant is not tradition. It's convenience dressed up like culture. I hope you all have a beautiful meal. I am having one, too." I hit send. Then I left the thread. Theo was quiet the way good people are when you are in the middle of becoming. He pushed the second coffee toward me in case courage needs a refill. Tell me about the notebook, I said, nodding at the one in his bag. He smiled into his cup. It's not mine, he said. I found it under the seat after you rushed off. Maybe it belongs to someone who is also leaving. Maybe it belongs to someone who needed a witness, I said, and we sat for a minute with the heat of that. By noon, the rain had a rhythm I could almost hum to. Ruth texted a photo from her office of a mug that said, "Girl, unghost yourself." My mother sent a selfie with our old terracotta plant that somehow refuses to die. A number I didn't recognize sent a single sentence, "I'm proud of you, even if your methods were theatrical." It was Marcus's sister, Nadia, the quiet one who always passed me extra napkins at dinner as if prepping me for a future I would one day wipe clean. A loud memory rose the first time I met Nadia. How she had pulled me aside when the older aunts were doing their assessment of my bone structure, like it was a stock they were deciding to buy. "Our family loves hard and wrong," she'd said. "If you ever need an exit, call me." I had laughed then, because I believed exits were for other people. Now I added her to my favorites. At 12:30, Sabrina finally called. The screen lit with her portrait, the steel bob, the mouth that made love sound like an evaluation. I let it ring out, then listened as her voicemail arrived like a courier. The transcription app didn't catch everything, but it caught enough. "Irresponsible. Ungrateful. You have embarrassed Marcus. The family does not forget. We will discuss consequences." I pressed play and heard the part the transcript missed, the crack in her voice on my name. I didn't want vengeance. I wanted a boundary. I wrote another sentence in the notebook, under the vow. "A boundary is nothing but a gate I get to open and close." Theo stood to throw away the cups. "Do you need anything?" he asked awkwardly, as if handing me a wrench when I was busy with a surgery. "Like a ride or a locksmith? Or, I need to buy a cheap phone plan and an expensive pen," I said. "And I need to find a job that doesn't require me to explain why it matters." He grinned. "You can keep the pen you lent me." I had forgotten I'd given it. I had forgotten a lot. Because courage grows where it is practiced. I opened my email and wrote to a literary magazine I'd interned for in college. The one that paid in tote bags but edited with kindness. Subject line, "Returning." Body, "I have been away. I would like to read again and write again and be useful in the old way that kept me honest. Do you need someone to help, even a little?" I hit send. I breathed. At 1:05, a photo arrived from Nadia. It was the kitchen table at the big beige house, covered with bowls and laughter, a few men in dress shirts wearing aprons with saintly resignation. Children making towers out of paint. To Sabrina's horror, the oven open and alive. In the center of the image, Marcus stood with a whisk in his hand, looking like a man who had just discovered his arms were not decorative. Nadia's caption, "They're cooking. Miracles do happen." Beneath the photo, she added privately, "When you're ready, I'll help you move your things. I think you just taught all of us a language we needed." I stared at the picture until my eyes stung. I felt relief, yes, but something else too, a loosening. Like the knot in a rope deciding to teach itself a new shape. Sabrina would stew for months. I couldn't control that. Marcus would make promises, then break them, or make promises and keep them. And either way, I would not accept a life that required me to shrink so others could feel tall. "I think I need to find a place to stay longer than a futon," I said to Theo. To the room, to the version of myself that had finally cleared her throat. He nodded toward the window, where the rain had become a silver curtain. "It's a good day for beginnings." I opened the notebook to a fresh page and wrote a title I had been afraid to write for 2 years. The recipe for leaving. I wrote the first ingredient. Wake up at 3 and go. By twilight, the rain was a hush and the city smelled rinsed. And I had already crossed 3 small bridges back to myself. I bought a pay-as-you-go phone. I sent my resume to the magazine with a note that sounded like clear water. And I texted Nadia the address for Saturday move-out day with a simple, "Thank you for seeing me." When I forgot to see myself, that night on the futon, the plant shadow jungle on Ruth's wall made a kind of canopy over my fear. When sleep came, it came clean. In the morning, my inbox held a reply from the magazine. Come read pages with us this afternoon. We've missed your marginalia. I packed my notebook and the cedar apology flannel and left like a person who had errands. Not a person on the run. At the magazine, the managing editor, who still wore the same triumphant eyeliner, hugged me with the exact pressure that says both welcome back and we will treat you like a colleague, not a ghost. She handed me a stack of essays and a pencil. You always hear the sentence under the sentence, she said. We need that. I sat at a long table by a window and wrote small notes in the margins. Yes, here. Cut this false ribbon. Let the ending arrive on its own legs. Each check mark I placed felt like a bead restrung on my old, beloved thread. At lunch I called my mother. She put me on speaker so I could hear the apartment, the kettle, the radio playing an old song that has learned all its own ways to forgive. Are you safe? She asked first, because she is the kind of mother who rearranges the hierarchy of questions correctly. Yes, I said, and I'm working again. She exhaled like a held breath finally given a room. I knew you would leave when leaving loved you back. When I hung up, a text from Marcus waited. Unusually short. Couples counselor at 11 a.m. Friday? It was the first message that didn't treat me like a defective appliance. I replied, yes, if it's in a neutral office, not the house. And bring the list of things you have not said aloud. He wrote back, I have it. For the first time, I believed he might. Friday morning, I sat on a plaid sofa that had felt the weight of many people admitting what they had learned too late. The counselor, Dr. Ames, soft-voiced with clear eyes, asked us to speak in 5-minute turns, which kept the air from tearing. Marcus went first. He talked about loyalty like a leash, about growing up in Sabrina's orbit where gravity wore pearls, about how love in that language meant constant proof, and proof in that house meant spectacle, over-decorated tables, over-long speeches, a daughter-in-law always on. It was easier to let the ocean go on being the ocean than ask whether we knew how to swim, he said, and it was the first true metaphor I had heard from him in months. My 5 minutes tasted like copper at first. Then they tasted like the thing you finally name. I became useful, I said. I forgot to be loved. I stopped asking for softness because the house punished softness with a list. I wanted to be seen as family, but I was seen as function. Dr. Ames nodded the way a good witness nods, not in agreement, but in recognition. What do you want now? A door, I said. With my hand on the knob, Marcus looked at his hands as if they had written the guest lists. I want to learn to disappoint my mother so I can stop disappointing my wife. The hour ended like a curtain falling. We scheduled another for next week. Outside, we stood with the brittle awkwardness of two people reintroducing themselves at the ruins of a city. He spoke first. I'm cooking tonight, he said. Nadia's helping. Mom is quiet. She keeps saying the word tradition like a key that no longer opens anything. He looked up, almost shy. Would you like to come for dinner on Sunday? Not to work. To eat or not? If not, I'll understand. I'll think about it, I said. And watched the sentence stand upright on its own. On Saturday, Nadia met me at Ruth's with a rented van and a playlist that made survival sound like a chorus. She hugged me with her whole history and said, we'll be quick, at the big beige house. Sabrina was in the garden deadheading roses like a woman editing a sentence too long. She didn't look at us when we went upstairs. She didn't speak when we passed her on the way out carrying boxes of books. And my grandmother's blue mixing bowl and the framed photo of my mother laughing so hard. The picture looks like weather. That silence felt theatrical, but theater no longer required me to play a long dot in the bedroom. I found a note on my pillow in Marcus's handwriting. I am learning. I want to be worth your courage. Underneath it, the apron I had always worn at their gatherings, folded with the precision of apology. I left both on the bed. Downstairs, Nadia pressed a key into my palm. To my apartment, she said, in case the futon becomes a cloud. By evening, I had a small room of my own in a month-to-month sublet with a window that opened without argument and a desk that looked like it had been waiting for wrists. I pinned 2 sentences above it. A boundary is a gate I open and close, wake up at 3, and go. Days began to bead together, but not like panic like prayer. I copy-edited essays at the magazine in the mornings, took freelance shifts at a cafe in the afternoons where the milk foamed like surrendered weather, and in the evenings I wrote the recipe for leaving. It wasn't a book yet, just a long, honest ledger of what it takes to pick a lock from the inside. Each ingredient arrived with its own scent. Learn the difference between obligation and devotion. Borrow a friend's courage until your own arrives. Pack a bag with only verbs. On Wednesday, the magazine ran a small piece I wrote under my full name. The one Sabrina always trimmed because it sounded too long for place cards. The essay was about kitchens and inheritance and the myths families bake into their bread. It did what words do when they are ready. They found people who had been waiting. My inbox filled with strangers saying, "Me too." And I cried the easiest kind of tears, the ones that say join. Sunday came like a coin. I stood outside the big beige house with a Tupperware of roasted carrots because I am not a person who shows up empty-handed, even at the door of my undoing. Marcus opened it before I knocked. He had flour on his shoulder and no script in his throat. "Hi," he said, and his voice remembered how to be a garden. Dinner was nothing like the spectacles we used to stage. Nadia had made chicken with lemons that did not apologize for being bright. Marcus had made bread that failed beautifully and tasted like trying. The children, sticky-fingered and unscolded, invented a game where every adult had to trade places with someone at the table. Halfway through the meal, so I swapped seats with an uncle who had never once asked me a question, and found myself between two aunts who wanted recipes for starting over. Even Sabrina sat down, rigid as a newly built chair, and ate what we ate. She finally spoke at dessert, when Marcus served a lopsided cake and called it our offering to imperfection. "In our family," she said, and the room braced. "We adjust." She looked at me, her mouth almost softer. "I am not good at it." "I will try." "I believe you will try," I said. Because that was the most I could promise to believe, and it was also enough. After dinner, Marcus and I walked under the rosemary hedge where the air always smells like remembered hands. He told me he had begun therapy of his own. He told me he had changed the house rules. No cameras in the kitchen. No lists taped to the fridge unless the person whose hands will follow them wrote them. "I can't ask you to come back to what was," he said. "What was is over. I can only ask if we can make something new in a place that has learned to keep quiet. When a woman speaks, we can try," I said. "From two homes. For now, I put my terms in the air like flags, separate apartments for 3 months. Counseling every week, no surprise guests or obligations. A moratorium on the word perfect and a practice of naming what things cost us before we spend them." He accepted each one with the seriousness of a person signing a treaty he intends to honor. Summer slid forward. I learned the map of my neighborhood by the smell of its bakeries. I took long walks with Ruth and we spoke the way people do, when they are no longer carrying their sentences like heavy boxes. Nadia came over on Thursdays with discount flowers and gossip that was mostly gratitude. My mother visited and lined my windowsill with jars of cuttings, basil, mint. A stubborn rosemary that took its time forgiving me for the hedge. Sabrina did not call. She sent a single letter, typed, which made it easier to meet without flinching. It said, "I am told I have called many things tradition which were only my preferences. I am learning the difference. If you return to our table, I will call you by your name." I read it twice, then folded it into the notebook next to the ingredient that says, "Accept apologies that arrive." Without a recipe for your compliance, the magazine offered me a permanent part-time role mornings, with health insurance, with my name on the masthead and my edits leaving their small, loving fingerprint on the world. In the afternoons, I kept writing the recipe for leaving until it began to look like a book. An editor at a press friend of the eyelinered manager asked to see pages. I sent them, hand steady. She wrote back 3 days later, "We want this. Women will hand it to each other the way they hand each other keys." On a late September evening, Marcus and I met at the counselor's office and talked like people on a porch, not about the past, but about the weather of tomorrow. "I don't want to drag you back to a house that taught us the wrong grammar," he said. "I want to build our own syntax, subject, boundary, verb," I said. And he laughed in a way that bent toward me without breaking. We agreed to a small plan, dinners twice a week, no talk of reconciliation yet. Just the practice of being ourselves in the same room. Some nights we failed. Some nights we remembered the choreography that had once been easy. The way his hand found the small hill of my back as we crossed streets. The way I could lean my head on his shoulder and hear the exact rhythm of home. Each time, I asked the only question that matters when two people are trying to be honest. Is this kindness? Or is this habit? If it was habit, we thanked it and set it down. If it was kindness, we invited it in and fed it. The first early morning I woke at 3 again. I did not pack. I brewed coffee in my small kitchen, opened the window, and watched the city yawn. I wrote a new ingredient, wake at whatever hour you choose, and go only where you mean to go. When my book found its shape, I wrote the last page in the same cedar-scented flannel I had once stolen as proof that I could take things. It ends like this: the recipe for leaving is also the recipe for staying. If staying means you can taste yourself in the meal, it is made of verbs and the courage to measure with your whole hand. It serves one, then miracle serves everyone. On the night of my launch reading at a small bookstore strung with warm lights like patient stars, the room filled with faces I loved, Ruth in the front row with a notebook open. For the pleasure of it. My mother in a blue dress that hummed. Nadia with flowers and the look of a sister no ceremony can confer and none can revoke. Theo in the back, grinning beneath a sign that said poetry with resignation letter energy. Even Sabrina came, late, sitting on the aisle as if ready to exit if the words asked too much. They did not. They asked only for honesty, and she stayed when it was over. When the signing line had dwindled to 3 teenagers with nervous hands, and a grandmother who kept saying, "This is for my granddaughter who doesn't know the word no has cousins." Marcus approached the table. He placed a small envelope in front of me. "Elise," he said, "for a little house with windows that argue in the right way. I'm buying it. Not for us yet, for you. In case you want something that's yours while we learn." I looked up. Why? Because love that respects you wants you to have a door only you control later. I walked home under a sky that had finally stopped threatening rain. I opened my own door with my own key, set down the flowers, and leaned the envelope against a jar of stubborn rosemary. I poured a glass of water and stood at the window the way I used to stand at ovens, waiting for rise. Somewhere in the city, dinner tables were drowning in butter and opinions. Somewhere else, a young woman was packing a small suitcase at 3 a.m. and choosing herself. I turned to my desk, to the notebook whose elastic scar now felt like a healed wound. I wrote the final line of the last ingredient, and the words did not tremble. Wake up at whatever hour carries your name. Open the gate. Step through. Close it behind you gently so the ones you love can still knock.